Well, when Japan does begin to rebuild after the devastation of today's events, one of the questions is how much damage will be covered by insurance. Paul Kovacs is Executive Director of the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction, and he has some answers. Great to have you here with us.
Good to see you again, Amanda.
Too early to have a ton of answers, but let's start with the insurance picture in Japan. One thing we know about this country is that preparedness for earthquakes is high on the agenda. They've spent a lot on it. They are well aware. So both personally and in terms of public buildings, corporate buildings, how much insurance is there, do we think?
The Japanese take earthquakes very seriously. They've made a lot of very positive decisions about how to reduce the risk of earthquake damage. Earthquake insurance has been in place in Japan for about 45 years. It is very different than that we have here in Canada. They've set it up so that they know with great certainty the most that they will pay. I don't think this will hit all of those peaks, but they get quite concerned that could an earthquake lead to so much damage that the earthquake insurance industry or the insurance industry would be at risk. There's some early estimates that this could be a $10 billion payout. $10 billion in today's world is something that the insurance industry can handle.
Now, in this case, of course, however prepared you can be for an earthquake, it's difficult to prepare for a tsunami, an event that involves something as unpredictable as the water. Is there coverage for that? Would people be insured for water damage along those coastal regions?
So for Japanese earthquake insurance, if you have it, which most people do not, it covers everything. It covers a tsunami, it covers shaking, covers fires, it covers anything that is caused by an earthquake.
Now, for the insurance industry, the markets bounced back today, but insurance stocks really did. That was a focal point for investors, asking the question, how is this going to affect some of the biggest players? We know that insurance companies themselves offset their risks through products that they offer the market. Give us a sense, they call them catastrophe bonds, CAT bonds for short. What are they, and do they work for the industry?
Now, they work very well for the Canadian industry. Again, the Japanese industry is very different. So most of the insurance in Japan is provided by companies that are not elsewhere in the world. They're based mainly in Japan. And those companies can buy reinsurance, and some do. The information about how many have that is unknown. That's somewhat of a corporate secret. Somewhat unique to Japan is companies can also get reinsurance from the government of Japan. And typically the government is one of the larger reinsurers in Japan. So the expectation is much of the costs will be contained within Japan with Japanese insurance companies and Japanese governments. There will be a little bit that goes to the world reinsurance industry, but it'll be a smaller amount than we've seen from some other events like the earthquake recently in New Zealand.
So if then in that case the reaction in the market might have been overdone
I think that's part of what we saw during the day, that there was a quick reaction, but as the day unfolded there was people learning a little bit more and saying Japan is a little different.
Now, on the broader subject of CAT bonds, are they a good investment? Because people may have heard of them and think, you know, how do they work? When do they pay out? How do they work?
CAT bonds are relatively new. It's an alternative to reinsurance, so an insurance company that would like to spread its risk can buy reinsurance, and that's what it does most of the time, or it can issue a bond. And if it issue a bond, it usually offers pretty good returns, but if there's an event like whatever is identified in the bond, an earthquake in the area or maybe a hurricane bond, then the investor might just get the principal back and no return at all. CAT bonds generally have done well, and most investors have demanded a high return. But there's still a very small part of the market. Most insurers use reinsurance to manage this risk.
Is it our imagination that these events are more frequent, or is it simply that because we're recording them so readily now, they appear to be more frequent? Is the world getting more dangerous and risky?
So you use the term frequent. They are definitely not more frequent. They are larger, absolutely. The costs involved in these large events are much, much bigger than they used to be. In part, they're more complicated. People are living in complicated societies. We have bigger cities. We have more things. So when these earthquakes occur or when big storms occur, they're doing a lot more damage than they did in the past.
So is the insurance industry able to keep up with those changes? I guess is another problem, because you need to, as we change the way we live and the cost of our buildings and our infrastructure, have we updated our insurance properly? So
the insurance industry took in about $4 trillion last year. By some measures, it's the world's biggest industry. The insurance industry is near record profits. So, you know, it adjusts its prices and behavior and covers what it needs to do. It's an industry that's in the business of managing risk. It understands what these risks are. So in Canada, but also around the world, the insurance industry knows this risk and understands it and covers it well.
We're not too worried about the industry then, given the size of it and the profitability at the moment?
The kinds of events we've seen are usually been modeled and anticipated, and
Yeah.
the industry knows how to manage this.
You made this point that a lot of this will be covered inside Japan. Does that mean that the Canadian insurance industry is perfectly insulated from this kind of event?
There are some links, but they are quite modest. So there are some Japanese insurance companies that bought reinsurance from the same companies that some Canadians are buying reinsurance from.
Yeah.
But I think this will be seen as a small event. I think that this will not have any impact at all on the Canadian market.
Paul, great to have you here with us for this.
Great to talk with you, Amanda.
Paul Kovacs, Executive Director of the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction.
This is really putting me in the mood.
Get some hair action with new Accent shampoo.
The images of the devastation in Japan have many people in Canada asking, how prepared are we for a large earthquake? Joining me now is Paul Kovacs, the Executive Director of the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction. He's here to tell us more about how ready Canada is when it comes to earthquakes. So we always talk about the big one in Canada, and we always hear it's not a matter of if, but when. How accurate is that?
Kim, you're absolutely right. It's inevitable. There will be a large earthquake in Canada. In Western Canada, the risk is higher. There's about a 30% chance in the next 50 years there'll be an earthquake in Vancouver, Victoria area that's big enough that people could die, that there'll be injuries, that there could be a lot of property damage. In areas like Ottawa and Montreal, it's a 5 to 10% chance in the next 50 years there'll be a large earthquake. Most of the rest of the country, it's much lower than that. But those communities are ones where there could be an earthquake. It's inevitable. It'll happen someday, and we need to get prepared.
Well, Vancouver, of course, the big worry. You said a 30% chance in the next 50 years. That's a big chance. How prepared are we?
We're prepared. We're doing a good job. I would like to see us do even more, but we're doing a good job. Japanese are a group that were the most prepared of pretty well any nation on earth. But in Vancouver and Victoria, we do take this quite seriously. I would argue in some other communities with a moderate risk, like Montreal and Ottawa, there's not the same kind of awareness, not the same kind of preparedness that we are seeing in Vancouver and Victoria.
So what could we do better then? What should we be doing right now?
There's things that have to be done at the individual level and things that have to be done at the community level. At the individual level, I mean, it's quite common in Japan to have a kit under your desk. If an earthquake occurs, you grab that kit and you will have handy a flashlight, a radio, perhaps some critical papers, a copy of your prescription. I mean, having a ready-to-go kit is something that Canadians should have at their home. You should have it at your work. Schools should know how to have that. It's more likely to see that kind of thing in Vancouver and Victoria than it is in Eastern Canada.
I mean, they just held an earthquake preparedness drill in Vancouver not that long ago. But what about the infrastructure itself? We've seen in Japan they updated the building codes in the 1980s to help, and we saw the dramatic pictures of the buildings swaying but not falling. How prepared is our infrastructure?
An earthquake around magnitude 9 is a very, very strong earthquake. We had one in Japan yesterday. We had one in Canada in 1700, so these do occur here. These are things that we have to be ready for as well. The research we've seen around the world, when they're this strong, when it's a strong earthquake, some of our greatest vulnerabilities is our infrastructure and our older buildings. In part, these are things that were designed before we really knew about modern earthquake engineering, and our systems can get into very serious trouble if we don't do things like upgrade and retrofit and make the investments to take modern knowledge and apply it to all of our existing systems.
And if we don't?
If we don't, then we're going to have people who die. We're going to have fatalities. We're going to have injuries. We're going to have a lot of property damage. We're going to have disruption that goes on for a long period of time. And we're seeing that right now in Japan and a number of other countries like New Zealand and Chile, and Haiti is the poster child of not being prepared.
Well, that's why I want to ask you, what are we learning from looking at Japan and its preparedness and its reaction to this earthquake?
The earthquake in Haiti was a 7.0, and the earthquake in Japan is around a 9, depending on the changing numbers that we're seeing for Japan, which is a much, much stronger earthquake. There were large losses in Japan. If they were as unprepared as Haiti, we would have had even more. So even a moderate earthquake, like happened in Haiti, can cause a remarkable number of fatalities if you fail to prepare. Canada's done a good job preparing. Japan has done a great job preparing, and that's how they got the number of fatalities, injuries, to the level they are now. I mean, it would have been much worse. Nevertheless, these are huge events that do have tragic impacts, even in Japan.
All right, and finally, in terms of preparedness, you mentioned having a kit ready. What should people do even if they don't have that? What's the best advice for people if the big one does hit? Where do you go? What do you do?
The first thing is to become aware. What is the risk where you are? The risk of a large earthquake is bigger in Vancouver and Victoria and very, very low in Calgary, Toronto, a number of other communities. So understand what the risk is for the perils where you are. It might be an earthquake, but it might be storms, etc. Once you've learned from community advisors, from the internet, from other experts, then find the right corrective actions. Having a kit ready to go is one of the things so that you'll feel more calm during an event, but there are long-term investments like to make your office or your home safer by changing and adapting and adjusting the environment that you're operating in. The Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction and other groups are sources of information about what you can do to protect yourself.
All right, well, as we're seeing the pictures from Japan there, we see how well they are dealing with it, as you said, but at the end of the day, there's only so much we can do, and we're seeing that right now. Listen, thanks so much for coming to talk to us today. Paul Kovacs, the Executive Director of the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction.
Good to talk with you, Kim.